Well, have you seen my green-eyed son? He shot a man down with the sawed-off gun. And they found him down by the Poncha train, where they cuffed his arms with a big iron chain. Orleans Parish Prison, won't you free me, green-eyed son? I heard him say as you led him away, sorry for what he's done. Orleans Prison, won't you free my green-eyed son? Hello and welcome back to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. And tonight, we will explore the history and haunts of the Louisiana Federal. The dark cloud that is the judicial system and courtroom of New Orleans. The Supreme Court room, although majestic appearance and exterior, holds haunted tales. Sit back and dwell in the darkness, mon ami, and thank you again for joining me in the Wicked Webs We Weave. The Louisiana Supreme Court hosts the highest judicial order in the state. Even though Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana, the Supreme Court meets in the French Quarter, right in the heart of New Orleans. The building is known for its beautiful architecture and its terracotta beaux art style, blending in with the architecture of the Vieux Carré. Ironically, however, the building was hated when it was first built, being called an eyesore. The facility hosts not just the Chief Justice of the state, but also the Library, the Attorney General, the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, among several other offices. Even though it's considered one of the city's gems, it remained neglected for decades. All the legal offices had vacated the building in the 1940s, and it wasn't until the restoration project in the 90s that brought the building back to life. The court is known for being haunted. Legends say that 2 witnesses to a crime were shot dead during a court hearing in the 1930s, somewhere inside the building. They say the mafia was behind the murders. The ghosts of 2 witnesses still live on the premises. The staff have reported phantom footsteps in and around the courtroom where they were murdered. They can usually be heard echoing through the halls late at night when the building is empty. The ghost of a lawyer also lives in the building. He's the most encountered ghost in the courthouse, and he can be seen wearing a beige suit and a briefcase. Those who have witnessed the apparition say that he always seems to be in a hurry, and usually vanishes after going through a door or turning a corner. Experts speculate that he's the ghost of a lawyer who shot himself in the courthouse after losing a big case. The courtroom itself is very beautiful. In the French Quarter, I walked by it many times. You might also notice the court being shown on the corner, Royal Street, in the show Treme. Exchange Alley. The site where the Supreme Court now sits was once a popular market district, known as Exchange Alley. The square was once lined with the offices of politicians and lawyers, but over time had earned quite a seedy reputation. The area became abandoned and run down. Pirates, bootleggers, and shady merchants used the alley to peddle their wares. Fights, stabbings, and murders were common. However, still, the people of New Orleans loved their dark little square. So when the Louisiana Supreme Court announced their decision to raise Exchange Alley, the public was outraged. Some saw the action as an attempt to reclaim a lost neighborhood, but most felt like they were losing a part of their history. When the alley was demolished, the Daily Picayune reported the Exchange Alley was one of the most historic sites in New Orleans. Before the Supreme Court building was erected in 1910, the court separated and operated out of several buildings around New Orleans. The original location was in the Government House, until 1820, when they moved into the Presbytere and Cabildo building at Jackson Square in the late 1800s. For more information on the Cabildo, please see my episode about the Jackson Cathedral. It had become apparent that the Supreme Court needed a new headquarters as the Cabildo had become crowded and outdated. The Louisiana Bar motioned to have a new building erected, and they got to work looking for a suitable location. The original plan was to demolish the Cabildo and Presbytere, but then that caused a massive public backlash. Then they planned to renovate the St. Louis Exchange Hotel until they settled on the area around Exchange Alley. While the plan did cause some public outcry, it was much less so than their plan to demolish Jackson Square. Exchange Alley had become run down, long ago in fact. It was once home to several politicians and lawmakers, made it a fitting location for the Supreme Court. Demolition of the alley began in 1903. The new Louisiana Supreme Court was completed in 1910, and the first season in the building was in October of the same year, which the session pre-held. The building has also several state offices like the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife and the Attorney General's office. The Beaux Arts style and terracotta sculptures might be looked at with wonder today, but the Supreme Court building was considered an eyesore when it was completed. It was called an intrusion and an artistic loss by locals and the media. Architect Charles Harris Whitaker called it one of the worst examples of a public building to be found in all of America. The lack of appreciation could be what caused its downfall. In the 1940s, the lack of public funding made the Supreme Court building a difficult place to work. The building was not being maintained and had begun to fall into disrepair. Several government offices decided to relocate, and the Louisiana Supreme Court moved to the Civic Center in 1948. The building remained mostly abandoned for decades, though the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife continued to operate in the building until 1982. The possibility of renovating the Royal Street building began to circulate amongst lawyers and politicians in the 80s and 90s. The idea gathered steam, and the Louisiana Historical Society was founded in 1992 to lead the charge. Over the next few years, the organization secured funding and began restorations and renovations. By 2004, the building was complete, and the Louisiana Supreme Court moved back to Royal Street. One by one, the officers that had vacated the building decades earlier had begun to move back in. And Royal Street is a beauty indeed, one of my favorite streets in all the French Quarter, if not the favorite. The ghost of the Louisiana Supreme Court. Nearly every building in New Orleans is haunted, but oftentimes we don't expect government offices to be haunted as well, or have ghosts and lore. But in the Big Easy, nothing is impossible. While the Supreme Court building doesn't do ghost tours, numerous employees and staff can corroborate the ghostly tales of the grand building on Royal Street. They say at least 4 spirits live in the building, though there have been many more who have been seen and heard and regaled. Since it's a government building, getting inside to investigate and search for paranormal activity is quite tricky, illegal, and not ideal. The most encountered ghost in the Supreme Court building is that of a lawyer. According to local lore, the man lost a huge case sometime in the 1950s and shot himself inside the building out of grief. His ghost has lived on Royal Street ever since. Those who have seen the lawyer say he wears a beige suit and carries a briefcase. He always seems to be in a hurry and is often seen walking the halls at a brisk pace. He is known to walk through halls, disappeared around corners, on the way to the phantom court case. Some even claim to have seen him outside the courthouse walking the streets, as if he just left the building. In the 1930s, a murder case involving the mafia was taking place in the courthouse. In an attempt to save one of their own, 2 of the witnesses were shot dead in the courtroom by one of the mafioso's gangsters. The ghosts of the 2 witnesses live on in the Supreme Court building. While they prefer to remain unseen, many claim to have heard their phantom footsteps stomping around the courthouse. Noises echo through the halls of the building, and it's quite daunting to hear someone walking around when the place is empty. The witnesses tend to appear at night after the staff have long checked out. The ghost of a young woman hangs out right outside of the building. She is often seen sobbing on the steps of the Supreme Court, and nobody knows who she is, and there aren't any records that identify who she might have been. Some witnesses claim to feel her reach out to them after seeing her apparition. These are just some of the many tales of folklore into which I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to visit New Orleans, the most haunted city in the world, but the most rich in history, in my humble opinion, of the country, and a beautiful experience of culture, music, food, scenery, life, love, and, of course, haunts. I would like to thank NewOrleansGhost.com and research for making this episode, and I want to thank all of you again for joining me in the wicked webs we weave. We're growing in subscribers, and it means a lot to me that you're listening and appreciating these episodes. If there's any topic you would like to hear me cover in a future episode, please do leave a comment on the YouTube video. And I am your host, Ryan Mckern, once again, mon ami. Until we meet again in a dark, lit French Quarter moon. Au revoir.